Welcome to EREMA. We're the world's most forward-thinking and innovative supplier of plastic recycling extrusion equipment. Over 5,500 systems are currently producing 14 million tonnes of quality pellets annually across the globe. If you require efficient conversion of plastic scrap or waste materials into valuable products, EREMA has a solution for you. Feel free to check us out at erema.com.
Hello again, everyone. I'm Joe Pryweller, Conference Director for Plastics News. Welcome to our Ask the Expert Recycling series. These sessions are your chance to engage with professionals on a range of topics and to interact with questions. Today's Ask the Expert is sponsored by EREMA. Our expert today is John Capece, Sales Manager of Post-Consumer Applications at EREMA. John will discuss post-consumer recycling and a path to a circular economy. John will answer your questions after the presentation. To submit a question, email pnevents@crane.com, or if you are watching along on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, submit your questions through those platforms. With that, I will turn things over to John Capece of EREMA. John, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Joe. Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate that. So as Joe said, my name is John Capece. I work for EREMA North America, a subsidiary of EREMA GmbH in Linz, Austria. And today I'm going to be talking about post-consumer recycling. Next slide, please. So an interesting statistic is in the United States at the moment, only 8.7% of plastics that are being generated are actually being recycled. So the remainder is split between landfills and incineration, 75% to the landfill and approximately 15% being incinerated. So, as you can see, we do have a long way to go as far as the recovery and recapture of these plastics. So EREMA at the moment and other plastic recycling machinery suppliers are really in a position right now to take on this challenge, and we hope to do so in a positive manner moving forward. Next slide, please. So here is a typical sign that a municipality would send out to their residents regarding the separation and collection of their recyclables within their home. Very similar to what I would see in the area that I live in, is that we're doing a very good job collecting things like PET bottles, HDPE like shampoo, detergent bottles, things like that, as far as food containers and whatnot. However, many municipalities are still not collecting films, plastic bags, and things of this nature. Because the MRFs aren't yet really equipped to handle that. They can have processing challenges, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. Additionally, would be styrofoams. So many municipalities at the moment are not collecting that on a regular basis, but they may hold like an annual or semi-annual event to collect that and send them to the appropriate processors that do have the equipment to handle it. Next slide, please. So this would be an example of the processing issues on the bags. At the moment, they have a tendency to get caught up in the rotors and causing tremendous amounts of downtime. So at the moment, it's just in order for these folks to keep up and running, sorting through the other types of materials that are recyclable. These materials are being collected in different manners, like you might see collection bins at the front of a supermarket or a retail store. That way they can go to a dedicated recycler that are equipped to process them. Next slide. And then on the polystyrene side, one of the challenges is just the bulk density. So they take up enormous amounts of space. Like, for example, if you were to take this styrofoam packaging and fill up a 53-foot trailer, it would probably only weigh about 3,000 pounds. And then imagine hauling that across the country to the processor that's equipped to actually pelletize this stuff. The financial and doesn't really make too much sense. So the solution in this type of material is to really compact it and then ship it after that. We don't seem to be at that level where there are enough processors out there willing to take on this challenge where they can collect, compact, and ship for further processing. Next slide. Okay, there's a whole variety of different post-consumer plastics that we could talk about today, but we have a short amount of time, so I just wanted to provide a couple examples of input materials that you would typically see in a post-consumer resin. It could be anything, it could derive anywhere from a HDPE milk or juice container collected from households to HDPE rigids. These would come from like detergent or shampoo bottles. And then on the end to the right, we have the typical linear low bills that are contaminated with adhesives, paper labels, strapping, things of the sort. The bills, the good thing about the bills is it's not true post-consumer. What we call it in industry is post-transit. So at the back end of a big box store, you can imagine the workers are just simply instructed to take all of this stretch film and then put it into a baler. Most of the time, and the majority of percentage of these bills are the polymer that the process is interested in extracting, but there are other contaminants that we'll talk about further in the presentation. Next. Okay, so types of contamination. When you think post-consumer materials, it's already been in the hands of someone that uses it. There's shipping involved. There's all sorts of different types and levels of contamination that can be involved, anywhere from paper labels, stickers, different types of adhesives. Keep in mind those labels are actually put onto the films or packaging with adhesives, so that adds another processing element. We see things like foreign plastics. So this could be like if you were processing a bale of stretch film, that could be PET bottles, for instance, within that bale. We see things like wood, rubber, metal. Metal could be ferrous or non. Aluminum cans or just pieces of steel. Anything from sand and minerals to glass, food residuals, and of course, printing inks. Next. So this brings me to my next topic. You have this material that's already been in the hands of the consumer. It could have any or all of the contaminants that I mentioned in the previous slide. So one of the necessary steps is to sort the material. And what we're trying to do here is remove anything that's unwanted. So for instance, if you were a processor that was interested in those stretch film bales, you don't want any paper or cardboard in there. You obviously don't want any metals or glass or anything like that. So you would need, after you open up that bale, you would need to sort, ultimately ending up with the polymer that you're interested in. Next slide. So in addition to sorting, now that you've taken out all those other known contaminants, there are going to be ultimately things, say on that film, like the labels that we talked about, that need to come off. So one of the ways in which we do that is to send the material through a washing system. Now, EREMA is not a manufacturer or supplier of a wash system. We do work with many in the industry, but the idea would be to deliver the EREMA equipment input material that is previously washed as it relates to post-consumer materials to get the majority of that dirt and sand and labels and adhesives off. There are different types of wash lines, and I'm not going to get into it because I'm not a wash line expert. But the two main options as far as wash lines are either a hot and a cold wash. And what we've learned through the years is that particularly in the removal of labels, the hot wash is most effective because it loosens up that label from the film, melting to remove the adhesive. So once you get that adhesive and label off, and the material is coming out much cleaner. And keep in mind, the reason that we're doing all these steps, the sorting and the pre-washing and all that, is ultimately to achieve a pellet quality that is very high and desirable. Next step. Perfect. So here we have the EREMA solution to post-consumer recycling, and that is that model name is called our EREMA TVE Plus. And what you see here is essentially a complete line from input material going on the in-feed conveyor, going up through metal detection, coming into our preconditioning unit. Then we filter, degas, and pelletize. And over the course of the next few slides, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Next. Okay, great, thank you. So the EREMA preconditioning unit is the heart of the EREMA systems. This is where material comes into the drum, and on the base of this drum is a disc that's rotating at very high speeds, up to 750 RPM. And affixed to that disc are knives and knife holders that are cutting up the material, preheating, drying, homogenizing, and if the customer requires it, we can actually dose within that drum. So a lot of these features will give you benefits, such as because we're preheating the material in the drum, we're actually able to offer a shorter screw. Lowering that L over D obviously minimizes the dwell time of the melt in the screw, which ultimately will give you a better quality melt. And in addition to that, the preconditioning unit is providing a constant load on the intake section of the screw, and that provides a nice stable process. So it's a continuous process. You know, when you're operating equipment like this, you always want everything to run very stable, and the preconditioning unit always providing a constant load on the screw is an important element. Next slide. Okay, so one thing that comes up as material is coming actually off of a wash line is the amount of moisture that's on the material, and it can vary depending on the type of material. And it may be somewhat variable in nature. So what the EREMA is designed to do with the preconditioning unit is dry up to about 4% without any auxiliary equipment. But by adding things such as our SAS, which is a vacuum of air coming out the side of the drum, air flush is positive airflow into the base of the drum, and a Trox exhaust on top, we can increase the percentage of moisture in that material can be increased as much as 8%. And if we add a second disc, we can actually accept moisture up to 10 to 12%. So really, the EREMA is a perfect fit following a wash line because we're able to handle material in line without doing any offline drying. Next. Okay, so an important element besides the moisture removal is then degassing, and the EREMA TVE Plus offers triple degassing. The first step is actually in the preconditioning unit as we start heating up the material and releasing the first step of volatiles. The next step is what we call reverse degassing. So as the melt starts to build up pressure going into the screw, any gases that are formed at that point actually back up and go into the preconditioning unit and out through the hood. And then the third step is a vent section on the barrel, which is immediately following the filter. Filtration in the post-consumer world is as you're filtering out material and as you're filtering out the contamination, there's a tendency for gases to be formed in that process. So that's why EREMA positioned the vent section immediately following the filter in order to remove those gases and ultimately end up with a nice gas-free solid pellet, which will improve quality. Next slide. So as we discussed just a moment, I probably got ahead of myself there. The position of the filter on the TVE Plus, as you can see, is positioned between the preconditioning unit and the vent section for the reasons that I just talked about a moment ago. Next. All right, so a little bit about the laser filter itself. For people inquiring about the filter, the first question is, where are the lasers? There's no lasers involved in the filter itself, but actually we use them to make the filter discs. and it's made up of millions of tiny little holes. It takes about 2 to 3 hours to make just one of these discs, and we can go as low as 70 micron. We're doing some testing with 50 micron, but the idea is that the filter is continuous, which means that once you set it up with the correct discs and get running, it's continually removing contaminants off of the disc and then purging them into a container that lies beneath. And the filter is rated for up to about 5% soft contamination. By soft contamination, I mean things like wood, rubber, foreign plastics, things like this nature. It's not designed to remove things like rocks and stones and glass. These are hard contaminants that can be damaging to anything on the line. One of the things that our customers like about this filter is that it can handle very high pressures, up to 320 bar or 4,600 psi, and that it saves an enormous amount of labor because you're not paying someone to constantly change screens. Like on a typical screen changer, when you're dealing with higher levels of contamination, you end up changing screens a lot. So in addition to the cost of the screens, you're paying someone to stand there all day long and change these screens. The EREMA laser filter is perfectly designed to run nonstop for weeks at a time, for instance. The screens that are in there can be removed and cleaned and used again, up to about 1 million pounds. So there's a good lifespan on them as well. In addition to offering this unit directly on our TVE Plus model or other model equipment, we can also offer them standalone. So if a processor already has a piece of equipment like an extruder that they need a standalone continuous filtration, we can surely be an option. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Could we just play that video that I had on the laser filter? Thank you for that. So as you can see in that video, you're actually able to see the routing of the plastic melt and how it enters the center of the filter. One of the major design benefits of the EREMA laser filter is that the actual filter mediums, the discs itself, are static. And what I mean by that is they're not moving. The moving part that we have in the center is what we call a star scraper, which has 3 self-sharpening blades on either side. The only way for melt to pass through this filter is to go through the discs themselves. And we have, like I said in the previous slide, we're able to reach very high pressures on that. For material like the fractional melt HDPE, for example, the laser filter is really an excellent choice. If you're interested in seeing more videos, EREMA actually has a YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube, you can search on YouTube for EREMA GmbH and have access to all of our videos. So next up here is Regrind Pro. I'm just going to talk about that a little bit. And EREMAs are typically known in the film world for recycling because we're able to take this light bulk density input material and kind of densify it within our drum. In order to meet larger market demands, EREMA had to make some advancements in their technology to better process things like regrind, for example. So what we've done is we're offering this package to process regrind. The material will still come into our drum, but we have some programming in there which will allow it to actually fill up the drum in a series of steps. And what we want to do is heat up that regrind slowly and soften it, so when it enters the screw, there's very low shearing going on. And that's important to keep the melt properties and degradation low. We can run all sorts of regrinds, anything from HD, polypropylene, ABS, automotive parts, and that sort of thing. As far as moisture levels, with the auxiliary equipment we talked about before, we can handle up to 8% or so. Next slide, please. Sorry about that. So as far as the process of the Regrind Pro, same machine, same setup, but what we're doing is we've slowed down the RPM on the disc inside the drum. So instead of like on the films where we're running 750 RPM, we're slowing that RPM down to maybe 300. We're really slowly heating up that regrind material to prepare it for extrusion. Like I talked about, low shearing because you're already going in hot. An important feature of the Regrind Pro is that we're actually not trying to cut or size reduce the regrind that's in the drum. So we've replaced those knife holders with just these steel girders. And the reason that we do that is because if there's any contamination in there, we want to try to keep it as large as possible. And that makes our filtration much more effective because now we're filtering out large pieces instead of small ones, allowing any tiny ones to kind of pass through. And then, of course, as always, degassing immediately following the filtration step. Next, please. So just a little bit about the EREMA pelletizer. It is our own design. We're able to handle anything from 300 pounds an hour up to 5,500 or 6,000 pounds an hour for melts up to about 80. It's a simple design. Our customers that have these installed like them because they're easy to operate, they're easy to clean, and they're flexible. For instance, so if you were if you were running HDPE and then later in the day or later in the week you're switching over to polypropylene, that could be done as easily just changing the dye, which takes about 15-20 minutes. Next up. Okay, so one thing that I haven't talked about yet is the EREMA refresher. So processing post-consumer materials can leave you somewhat with a pellet that has undesirable odors. And one way to alleviate those odors is actually passing the pellets through what we call the refresher system. And it's essentially two silos where you have the finished pellets coming into what we call a process hopper. And the working principle of this component is that we're filling up the silo and we have positive airflow at a specified temperature for a specified time. The actually dwell time is based on trials. So we would ask our customers to send us, say, 300 pounds of their pellets, or we could produce 300 pounds in our lab, and then try to determine what amount of time it would take to actually remove the odors from those pellets. And then we would offer a piece of equipment that would be sized appropriately. That could be anywhere from 3 to 7 hours or possibly more, depending on the amount and type of odor that we're talking about. Next slide. So this here would be an example of a complete system, which includes an EREMA Regrind Pro, followed by a refresher system. And this is a system that we would offer for someone that would be interested in processing food grade HDPE. So for example, milk jugs. You would have that material washed and then fed into the EREMA, and then the pellets would go through our refresher system, giving you an FDA approved HDPE pellet. We do have applications in with FDA to also have polypropylene materials FDA approved. Those applications are still pending, but as soon as we're approved, we'll be making announcements on that. Next slide. So one of the major things that processors need to pay attention to, obviously, is quality. Just like any other product that manufacturers are making, our recyclers are making pellets, and quality is important to them. It's important to their customers. It's important to the end product. So EREMA have auxiliary equipment to basically give our equipment and operators the tools that they need to try to maintain high levels of quality. Sometimes there could be dosing requirements to improve the characteristics of the melt. So we would add an inline throughput meter that is actually giving a signal back to the dosers, whether it be powder dosing or pellet dosing. And that can be done automatically because the throughput meter could give that signal to the doser. The operator wouldn't have to intervene. So as throughput levels are rising and falling, the doser would follow what the throughput meter is giving it. In addition to that, we have an kind of a new development, which is called Polyscan. And this is essentially an indicator, which is installed on the side of the preconditioning unit, that can tell the operator what polymer is inside the drum. And I know that sounds crazy. An operator should know what he's running. But if you can imagine being in a setting of a recycler where there's thousands and thousands of Gaylord boxes of material that need to be processed, sometimes things could be mislabeled or they mistrack. So it allows the operator an opportunity to confirm that he's running the material that he thought he was running. In addition to that, we can offer what we call quality on color. So this would be done post-pellet production. And it's simple. If the processor only wants to accept a certain range of color, then they can put that within the program to accept that range, and anything outside of that range would simply need to be diverted. There are things, there's a digital item that we can add on for OPC interface, and what this allows is the processor to have access to all of the running conditions and parameters, and basically extract that data and collect that data for quality control purposes, and that would be stored on the customer's own servers. And then as far as automation, there are several automated steps on the EREMA equipment, anything from speeding up and slowing down automatically, feeding auto. In addition, pellet size. So for instance, if there's variations in the input material, sometimes that can lead to variations in pellet size. EREMA have programming to allow the pellet size to stay consistent regardless of the variations in input material. Next slide. So EREMA, it looks like I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through the next few slides pretty quickly. EREMA offer the option to purchase spare parts online. You can simply put in the serial number of your machine and then see all the parts in a digital format that you can check availability, pricing, and order. Next slide. The EREMA Blueport package is an app that you can actually have on your phone or your computer, and you can actually see live what your machine is doing, some key running parameters. In addition, you'll have access to the spare parts online and maintenance videos. Next. So this is a broad outlook of the EREMA group. We have subsidiaries besides North America, also in Russia, Asia, China. We have a sister company, Pure Loop, where instead of a preconditioning unit, we have an integrated shredder. And our company PowerFill, or business unit PowerFill, is dedicated to our filtration. KeyCycle is a business unit that can offer our customers full turnkey solutions. So it's almost a consultative position where they can basically design a complete plant, everything from bales coming in to pellets going out and all the steps in between. 3S is a company that we have located close to our factory that produces things like screws and barrels and blocks for screen changers. And that allows us to maintain full control over the quality of those parts. UMAC is our used machinery division, and then Plasmac has been recently acquired by EREMA, also offering recycling equipment. Next slide. And then just a little bit about the office that I work in, EREMA North America. We're located in Ipswich, Massachusetts, founded in 1992. So as of next year, it'll be our 30-year anniversary. We have 34 employees, large service staff, sales, spare parts, huge spare parts inventory, and a tech center. So really one of the major benefits here is that we have the ability to take in your materials and test them. We would process 3,000 or 4,000 pounds and then send those pellets back to you for your internal testing to determine if the pellets are suitable for whatever end product or processing that our customers are doing. Really, I think the main benefit of having this office here is the ability to kind of bridge the gap between the United States and Europe, where we're in our own customer's time zone. We're able to provide that support locally. We have service people standing by to take your calls or emails and troubleshoot everything in our own time. Next. Okay, sorry I was rushing towards the end, just running out of time here, but thank you everyone for tuning in. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Thanks, John. Terrific presentation and a lot of interesting this discussion on some of the recycling machinery, what's going on, how we can probably increase the recycling rate with what's being offered. Again, if you have questions for John, you can ask them by submitting your questions at pnevents@crane.com via email, or if you're watching along on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, you can ask your questions through those platforms. So, John, we only have a little bit of time, so let me ask a few things for you. You talked about a lot of different aspects of the machinery that EREMA is offering. What sets you guys apart? For there's other recycling machinery on the marketplace right now. What if you're going to say what would you say is a differentiator with what you were talking about today?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Joe. Thank you for asking. EREMA is, I look at them really as the pioneer of this type of equipment. They've been in operation since 1983, so we're pushing 38 years of experience. And the amount of knowledge and skills and experience that my counterparts have overseas in Austria is just enormous. Our ability to offer solutions based on that level of experience is just, it can't be matched. In addition to that, the machines are known for being reliable. We have some of the original machines that were installed years and years ago are still running to this date. The quality of the equipment and also very important is the after-sales support. So in addition to all the support that we provide here at EREMA North America, we also have support overseas from my Austrian colleagues as well too.
Excellent. So what level of experience and support we're talking about primarily with this? Excellent. You mentioned you started off your presentation talking about only, I think, 8.7% of material generated is actually recycled, which is a low percentage anyway.
That's right.
I actually ask you, what's the greatest challenge you face with post-consumer plastic recycling? Why are we so low, and what's the greatest challenge concerning some of that?
Yep. Also a good question. Thank you. I think one of the challenges is just availability of material. Over in Europe, their recovery rates are much higher, but they also have very specific programs in place to better collect the material. As far as bags going into one bin and particularly different forms of recycling between the metal and glass and plastic. There just need to be systems in place to make it as easy as possible for consumers to actually to do the process of putting them in the right place and to recover higher rates of plastics. And then additionally, it comes down a lot with the municipalities and government. Over there, there are laws against, if something's recyclable, not sending it to the landfill, and US just isn't there yet. Like I said, 75% of plastics are going to the landfill. So it looks like we're in a time right now that there are going to be incentives put into place and whatnot to try to, improve the recovery rate of plastics. And I hope that turns out well, because, it's a valuable secondary raw material, and I really hate to see it go to the landfill like that. So I'm hoping that we see improvements in the coming years.
Yeah, and I know that there's a big push by brand owners and others to increase the recycling rate and to make products, I guess, out of recycled materials. So I imagine that might help too with some of this. You think?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to ask you very quickly too about blended materials. Let's say you have HDPE and polypropylene together in material. I'm thinking maybe of a pouch or something else or some other type of product anyway. Is a single machine flexible enough to process different polymers or blended materials in a package? Let's say.
So two different types of questions here. If there are multi-materials within one layer, essentially we'd bring everything in and then blend it, and then you have the question of what is the value of that blend. So if you're mixing different polymers, from a producer standpoint, that may make it less desirable in the secondary market, and discouraging them from mixing different polymers within their product. But if you're talking about a recycler that wants to process like large volumes of HDPE separately from PP, then the machine itself can be flexible enough to do both, just by a matter of changing some settings and changing the die, maybe a knife holder or whatnot.
Great. Here's a question that came in from an attendee on LinkedIn. What's the concentration and amount of contamination that blocks the laser filter already? What are issues with some of that with the amount of contamination that blocks the laser filter?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So the rule of thumb on the laser filter is that we're able to remove contamination levels up to about 5% or so. And what we do to validate that is actually ask customers to send us their material for a test here in Ipswich, Massachusetts, that we can run it on the equipment and then confirm, how much of that contamination we can take out effectively. But the answer would be about 5%. And that depends obviously on the material, the contamination, and that sort of thing.
Great. We're running out of time. Do you have any final comments or parting words you want to leave the audience with today?
No, not really that I can think of. If anything, I think that we need to teach our next generation the importance of recycling. So if you have any children at home, really encourage them to recycle, and it's the right thing to do. And hopefully they spread the word to their friends, and we have a future generation that they can help us recover and turn that 8% up to 87%.
Excellent. Let's move the decimal point, I guess, for that. That'd be great, right?
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, thanks, John. I appreciate John. I appreciate EREMA for sharing with us insights into post-consumer recycling and a circular economy, and everything you talked about today. Important for our planet, for plastics, for everything anyway. If you have additional questions for John, you can email him at jcapece@erema.net, and that's right on your screen there, and he'll be glad to answer any questions that you have or anything else you want to talk about with John. Today's Ask the Expert session will be available for viewing on the events page section, of Plastics News website. So you can look at it there if you want to review what John talked about today. I'm Joe Pryweller with Plastics News. Thanks for joining us at our Ask the Expert recycling series. We'll end with a short message from EREMA.
Welcome to EREMA. We're the world's most forward-thinking and innovative supplier of plastic recycling extrusion equipment. Over 5,500 systems are currently producing 14 million tons of quality pellets annually across the globe. If you require efficient conversion of plastic scrap or waste materials into valuable products, EREMA has a solution for you. Feel free to check us out at erema.com.